Well, hello everybody. My name is Brettschneider, and we are here with another edition of the Alaska Extended Outlook. So today we're going to talk about the new data that's come out for the month of January and the later half of the winter period. Now, we have a few interesting things to point out before we get to that. And most notably, as we're recording today, December 19th, we're only 2 days away from the winter solstice. And the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. It's a day where the sun reaches its lowest maximum elevation. Depending on where you are, it's in Alaska, it's going to be somewhere less than 10 degrees, and in some cases below the horizon. This is a picture I took a few years ago on the winter solstice. And you can see my shadow there is 67 feet long. So if you remember your trigonometry, and you should, you can compute exactly how tall I was, how tall I am. Okay, so if we look at this in terms of hours of daylight, I'm just going to step out of the way here. Here we are on the winter solstice, and you can see this area where we get no daylight. And now let's compare that with the summer solstice over here. Lots of daylight, 24 hours of daylight. You know, Fairbanks is over 20 hours. Anchorage is 18 and a half or so. So we have reached the bottom of the annual daylight curve. So things are looking up or looking down, depending on how you're thinking about it. Now, this is a map I put together a few years ago. I think it's really, really interesting. And it shows how much daylight you get on the winter solstice for some of the cities here in Alaska. And what it does is it models it based on the terrain. It takes that into account. So like if you're behind a mountain, you're going to be in a lot more shade. In some cases, all kinds of shade. Okay, and so you can see here in the Fairbanks area, not more than 3.5 hours of daylight. In some of these areas in the dark blue, that's no daylight. So behind the hills north of town, some areas are completely shaded. Here in Anchorage, the areas in the main part of the Anchorage Bowl, they're getting about 5 hours of daylight. But look at all these blue areas in the mountains up around Eagle River. You can't see it here, but the Palmer area. Some places are in shade for a month, 2 months, even 3 months around, say, Pioneer Peak. And then here in Juneau, a little farther south, very complex terrain. So a lot of areas in the dark blue have 0 daylight because of the obstruction by the mountains. Other places, 5 to even 6 hours of daylight. So kind of a cool little way to visualize how much daylight we're going to get on the winter solstice. All right, so first let's talk about how we've been doing the last little while. This is a plot that I make. It's called the Alaska Statewide Temperature Index, and it's a standardized measure of the average for the entire state using 25 cities. And you can see starting December 4th, we have been in the deep freeze here. So we're running now a solid 2 weeks of being below normal. And we'll talk later, but expect this to continue for a little while longer. Before that, we had been in the above normal for basically all of October, a majority of November, into the first few days of December, and then we've kind of fallen off a cliff. So we'll pick that up a little bit later. And for the month to date, as far as average temperatures, this is December 1st through 18th. And boy, look at this area from Fairbanks eastward. More than 13.5 degrees colder than normal. In fact, Eagle is now on average, more than 20 degrees below normal each day of the month for December so far. That's really a really remarkable departure from normal. And just a few little holdouts here around Talkeetna down to Anchorage, where it's been only slightly below normal. And that's due to the wind. The wind mixes down warmer temperatures from above, but that's going to change too. We're probably going to end up with one of, say, the 5th or so coldest December in the last 40 or 50 years. So this is going to go down as a pretty cold December once all things are said and done. And then precipitation. Now this is very highly variable, and measuring winter precipitation is really tough, even with automated equipment. But it's been really snowy around Fairbanks. Lately it's been really snowy around Juneau, wet here up the North Slope. A lot of areas very, very dry from Anchorage, Kenai, Kodiak, northwestward over to Nome. Very, very dry in this almost half of the state. So it's really a complicated pattern. And then how we're doing on sea ice. As of today, of course, the Chukchi and the Beaufort Seas are totally iced over. That's totally typical. The Bering Sea, we're at about 308,000 square kilometers, and normally 245,000 square kilometers. So we're actually running a little bit higher than the average of the previous 20 years, which again is less than the historical average of prior decades and prior centuries and millennia and so on. So, but for the time being, we're doing pretty good. And this is a larger plot that shows this same date going all the way back to 2005. You might want to pause and zoom in if you want to individual years, but this is kind of a larger, kind of a 20-year retrospective of how we've been doing each December 19th. All right, so now everything that you came for here, let's talk about long-term guidance. So we have a couple of options here. We can consult Mr. Groundhog. We can consult our handy-dandy Magic 8 Ball, or we can use science. So pick your choice. I'm going to go ahead and choose science. Okay, so we're going to do this in different time steps. First, we're going to talk about the 8 to 14 day outlook, and we call this the week 2. This is put out by the Climate Prediction Center, and this is covering December 26th through January 1st, so the end of the year into New Year's. And look at all this blue everywhere, with the darkest blue, 80 to 90% probabilities in southeast Alaska. For this 8 to 14 day outlook, very, very uncommon to have this dark blue anywhere in Alaska or anywhere in the lower 48. So very high confidence of much below normal temperatures. And in fact, they have issued but they put out a moderate risk of much below normal temperatures for the entire southern mainland, northern southeast, and all the way down through the Alaska Peninsula. So pretty much everywhere south of the Alaska Range, but north of, say, like Wrangell. Really, again, high confidence that temperatures are going to be potentially reaching cold weather advisory criteria. And then up in the interior, high confidence that a number of areas are going to drop below minus 40. And so that's kind of what we go by. Those are our two things we go by. Are you going to get below minus 40? And are you likely or possibly going to hit cold weather advisory criteria? Okay, and that's the highest chances down here. All right, and then the precipitation side of things, as often happens when we're in a really deep cold air mass, the kind of the northerly flow means it's coming from ice-covered areas or land-covered areas. There's not a lot of moisture. So expect dry conditions to continue in the southern mainland. I think here in Anchorage, we've only had 2 inches of snow in the month of December. It's possible that the month might end that way. There's a little hint that there might be some snow on Christmas, but don't be surprised if we end up much below normal for snowfall here in Anchorage for the month of December. All right, so now let's look out at the entire month of January coming up. And first I want to walk through a couple of the model guidance and then the official forecast. Okay, so this is the NMME. This is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. And this is for the month of January. And look at all this blue here, from the prairies and central and western Canada all the way up into most of the mainland of Alaska. Only exceptions are around the edges of the coast from the North Slope to the west coast. But this is very, very typical of a La Niña. We'll talk more about La Niña, but this is what we would expect in a La Niña winter. This is another one. This is put out, this is called the C3S, and this is a combination of European, UK, French, Canadian, German, American, Japanese, more Canadians, Australian, everyone. You just throw them all in the blender and see what you get, and it looks very much the same. Cold for a majority of Alaska and kind of near normal for the rest of Alaska. So it's a pretty strong signal for that. Here we go. Here's our official Climate Prediction Center January outlook. And looky there, it looks pretty much like what we just showed you from those computer model forecasts. Coldest, most below normal in southeast, and that's extending over into the Anchorage and even up into the Fairbanks area, and then near normal for the rest of the state. Now keep in mind, one of the key ingredients in this is trend. And we have really warmed a lot the last 15, 30, 50 years in January. So this map actually even includes the trend. So the trend is working to mute the cold temperatures. So once you overcome the trend, it's possible, like this month, that we could end up with pretty cold throughout the state. And then precipitation-wise, there's a signal of below normal precipitation for southeast and the Gulf of Alaska coast all the way down to Kodiak, and somewhat of a wet signal here in the western part of the state. I'm a little bit dubious that that's going to materialize. It'll be nice because it's been really dry over there. Some of these areas right now are only running about 25% of their season to date snowfall. So this would be good if this did work out. But precipitation forecasts at the monthly and seasonal timescale are always have a lot of large error bars. All right, so now let's look at the rest of the winter. Last month we had our December, January, February outlook. Now we're going to talk about January, February, March. And guess what? It looks just about the same. A very what we call a typical or canonical La Niña forecast, maybe even a little bit stronger than our month of January. In La Niñas, for Alaska, the strongest response is typically the second part of winter, not the early part or the middle. It's strongest in the later part of winter. And this map really reflects that. So a core of the cold in southeast and continuing on to the center of the mainland with lessening impacts, lessening of the signal strength all the way over to the coast. And again, this is that C3S, this whole, all the acronyms, they're all there, right? Pretty much the same pattern. Maybe not quite as intense, but the same pattern. And this is a probabilistic. So still only, this is the smallest category. This is 0 to 10%. So a lot of things can happen. We could have a warm January. I don't think that's going to happen. But all things considered, the most likely outcome is to be near to somewhat below normal for this January, February, March period. And here's our official Climate Prediction Center outlook. Looks very, very similar. Cold with the core of the cold in southeast, all the way running up to Anchorage, and then near to Fairbanks, with near normal for most of the rest of the state, and just a hint of above normal for the northwest part. Again, that's mostly trend is driving these above normal little slivers up here. So that could really kind of go either way. And then precipitation, again, wet on the west coast, dry from Anchorage and points southeast. And that's, again, what we typically see in a La Niña in many cases, but not always. Again, remember, low confidence, as always, on precipitation outlooks. Okay, so we've already mentioned La Niña a few times, and let's mention it again. As of the outlook issued, the monthly outlook issued on December 11th, we are continuing the La Niña advisory. So La Niña is this area in the central Pacific Ocean. We use that as a barometer of trade winds and tropical thunderstorms and how that affects the global circulation pattern. And we are still solidly in the La Niña. It's not strong, but it's been persistent now for a little while. This is the guidance on how we expect it to progress for the next few months. So looking at the November, December, January period, we have a 80+% chance that 3-month window will continue to be in La Niña, but we see steadily decreasing chances. And by the time we get to January, February, March, we're more likely to be in neutral conditions than we are Niña conditions. And then as we head out into the spring and the summer, look at that. Those evil red bars are rising, which means El Niño now becomes much more likely than La Niña. In fact, historically, this time of the year, there's about a 20% chance that we would be in El Nino. So the red bar would go up here based strictly on climatology. So the guidance is showing that something might be brewing out there. So we'll keep an eye on that, but that's a long way out. Now, what happens in the month of January during La Nina winters in Alaska? Looking back to 1940, if we look at all 32 times that we had some kind of weak, moderate, or strong La Nina, there's a definite cold signal across the state. Now, these aren't super large values, right? This darkest blue is only like 2 degrees. But everywhere in the state has some kind of signal to be colder than normal when we're in a La Nina in the month of January. So that's kind of where, that's the thumb on the scale, as I like to say. The thumb on the scale is colder. And thumb on the scale is also for snowier, right? So anywhere there's some kind of blue or purple in the month of January, that means La Niñas are favorable to have higher than average snowfall, okay? Particularly here in the central interior. Now this obviously stands out here in the Gulf of Alaska. It's all purple, and that's a function of it being colder there. So it's always kind of wet there, and it rains a lot there, but if it's a little colder, it snows a lot more. So that's what's going on here. But so don't focus too much on that. But in the mainland, it's not a super strong signal, but where there is a signal, it favors having snowier conditions. All right, so that's our January and late winter outlook. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Also like and subscribe, or drop a comment below if you have any additional questions or would like some feedback on anything said here or anywhere else. And I appreciate you hanging in there for the entire length of the video, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.